it was basically 2 weeks, 2 hospitals, so many like procedures, tests, so much scariness and so many doctors coming in and out of the room. And then finally to be given a diagnosis. And I still will always remember that moment because obviously it was pretty traumatic. The doctor came in and my parents were with me and he said, yeah, we think that you have chronic myelogenous leukemia. And that just, I feel like it was like the nuclear bomb went off in the room. Like, what? I saw myself as a 20-something-year-old who was healthy, like maybe not the happiest person in the world, but, I didn't have any symptoms. And then to be kind of told, leukemia, like you hear that word and of course you freak out.
All right, everybody, welcome to this week's edition of the Adapt You podcast. Super excited to have on today Lyn Delmastro-Thompson, who is a mind-body medicine practitioner using the healing systems of BodyTalk and Body Intuitive. So you're probably wondering, well, what is that? Well, we're going to get into that into this podcast. She's also a speaker and author of an Amazon bestseller, You Are Not Your Diagnosis. Lyn holds a master's degree in somatic psychology and has completed additional specialized training in biofeedback, therapeutic yoga, and Riki. So on this show, we often talk about things that are outside of traditional medicine, right? Taking a little bit of a different approach than the typical, hey, let's prescribe you a pill to mask your symptom, as much of our traditional healthcare system seems to focus on this on today, versus looking at some of the alternative methods that exist out there today. And that's why I'm excited to have Lyn on. What's interesting is, after being misdiagnosed with leukemia at the age of 25, Lyn became passionate about sharing with the world her message. And just because the doctor said an illness is chronic or incurable doesn't mean it has to be a life sentence. And Western medicine isn't really the only approach to healing, as I just said. When we explore other holistic options, true healing rather than symptom management can occur. And that's really what Lyn is all about. Through her one-on-one work with clients for the past 10 years, Lyn has helped hundreds of women reclaim their lives and health after receiving a life-changing health diagnosis. Many of her clients have been able to decrease or eliminate certain prescription medications, as well as increase their energy and stamina. So with that said, I'm going to say no more. Let's bring Lyn on the show so she can talk about some of the amazing work that she's doing and share her story of her misdiagnosis. All right, everybody, I want to welcome to the show today Lyn Delmastro-Thompson to the show. Thank you so much for coming on today. I'm super excited about Lyn's journey, her sharing it, and really learning a lot about how she's applied some things in her life and can apply some things in your life to hopefully improve it through her journey. So Lyn, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Lyn, one of the things that interests me the most about having you on the show is your position on sort of the approach to self-care and healthcare. And it sounds like it was something that was born from your own journey based off what I read from your bio. And it's an incredible story. It's a story, actually, to think
Yes.
of what actually happened to you. So without getting into what you do today quite yet, let's first talk about your journey, because it's incredible and really what has led you, I think, to what you do today.
Yes, definitely. So kind of the story starts when I was in grad school, and I started grad school straight out of college, and I was pursuing a path completely not related to health and wellness. So I was studying to get a PhD in history and thought I wanted to be a professor. And as soon as I started that program, I kind of felt out of place. Like I went from feeling like I was really thriving in my undergraduate program where I had a history degree to like, did I just like wake up on the wrong planet? Everybody else was all excited about like, we had, these huge books we had to read every week. And, I was thrown into being a teaching assistant like immediately without like any preparation of here's how you teach people. Just here's a book and you go lead discussion with your students. Yeah, exactly. So it was like not what I expected. And I started to kind of notice, hey, I'm feeling kind of anxious. I'm feeling kind of depressed. And I kept making up a story, as I think we often can do, of like, oh, well, grad school is supposed to be hard and it's supposed to be not fun. And I told myself this story. And then my body started to kind of give me more messages. I used to get migraine headaches when I was a teenager that were really severe, and I kind of got them under control when I was in college, and then they started to come back, like amplify in frequency and intensity. And I still kind of was like, even though inside I was like, I don't think I really like this path, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I led myself from a place of kind of fear and uncertainty of like, well, if I don't do this, then what am I going to do? I'm going to have to go out and get a job. And that seems really scary to me. And, at 21, 22, 23. So I kept going and kept going. And in the summer of 2004, I was scheduled for elective surgery. I was going to have a breast reduction, which was something I had wanted pretty much since I was 16, and went to the doctor, to do all of the pre-op blood work. And the night before the surgery, I get this phone call from the surgeon, and he says, your blood work looks really off. Hey, it could be like a lab error, or it could be, real. Don't panic yet. Run back over to the hospital. They'll draw another lab. They'll run it again, make sure it's not a lab error. And so I do that with panic kind of happening, even though he said, it could be a lab error. It also could not be. I'm pretty aware of that fact. And so I get a call maybe an hour later. They ran it pretty quickly. And he said, yeah, it's not a lab error. Your lab values look really off. He didn't really say anything more. He just said, I can't perform surgery on you tomorrow. And
he wouldn't, were you like, hey, what's wrong? What's wrong? What is it? Or...
I think I was too shocked, and he just kind of said, go see your primary doctor as soon as possible. Like, that's all he gave me. And I was just like, kind of, didn't know how to process all of that, going from thinking, hey, here, I'm getting this surgery I finally want, to like, oh, something's wrong and you can't have surgery. And so went to the primary doctor and, had some more tests run. And the next thing I know, I get this phone call. This is probably like a day or two after, the surgery was canceled. I get this call from a doctor that I had never met before. And he's like, how are you doing? And I'm like, other than freaked out that like this, like, when have you ever had a doctor call you that you don't know? Like, that was really bizarre to me.
For sure.
He's like, are you feeling any symptoms? I'm like, no, I don't know what I'm even supposed to really be looking for. And he said, well, if you don't have any symptoms tonight, you can stay home and just come meet me at the hospital tomorrow. And he, again, other than saying he was a gastroenterologist, didn't really say to me like what I should be looking for. And again, I was like in total shock. So I didn't think to ask the question like, hey,
what is it?
What should I be looking for? Like,
so you had no diagnosis at this point, just
no diagnosis.
You
exactly.
Saying, come on in. Oh gosh. So now your stress level is like, boom. Like,
yeah, exactly. There. I don't know how I really made it through that night. Cause I was like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be looking for. I mean, like anything in my mind could have happened. And so I go to the hospital the next day and meet him. And then I start this whole barrage of like, another specialist comes in, and then they start explaining, think that you clotted off the veins that drain your liver. And you're like, well, that's not supposed to happen. Like, that sounds really horrible. Like, what's going on here? So they sent a hematologist to try and figure out like, why is that happening? And went through testing with that, went through basically a failed bone marrow biopsy because I wasn't even given like pain medication to properly help me deal with such a painful procedure.
Oh, yeah. That hurts.
Yeah. And all the doctor said before that was like, oh, you're just going to feel some pressure. And I was like,
you're drilling into your bone. I mean, come on now. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, have you ever had this done on yourself afterwards, is what I wanted to say to him.
Yeah.
And so I went through basically kind of without going through, the day by day, I was put through so many tests. I was transferred to another hospital because I was in a smaller community, and they said, we think, that it is this, you clotted off the veins, and we've never done this procedure that they can do to actually like what they can do in your heart if you have a an artery that's clogged, they can send a
Blocked.
balloon down. And so they can do that for your liver, but we've never done that here before. So we're going to send you somewhere that has done it before, which is a good thing. Like, yeah, I don't want to be your first time
Definitely not
doing this. And then they still had to figure out like what was going on, and they had to do another bone marrow biopsy. So it was basically 2 weeks, 2 hospitals, so many like procedures, tests, so much scariness, and so many doctors coming in and out of the room. And then finally to be given a diagnosis. And I still will always remember that moment because obviously it was pretty traumatic. The doctor came in and my parents were with me, and he said, yeah, we think that you have chronic myelogenous leukemia. And that I feel like it was like the nuclear bomb went off in the room. Like, what? I saw myself as a 20-something-year-old who was healthy, like maybe not the happiest person in the world, but, I didn't have any symptoms. And then to be kind of told, leukemia, like you hear that word and of course you freak out.
Yeah, absolutely. You freak out. So what was that moment like? I mean, you're obviously, were you mad? Were you dumbfounded? Like what's the emotion in that moment?
The first emotion I remember feeling, I was just terrified, and I was terrified that I was going to be told I needed chemo. Like I remember even thinking to myself in that moment, and I didn't even put this part in my book because it was a part that's been hard to even talk about because there's such stigma around, suicide. I thought if I have to go through chemotherapy, I'm just going to kill myself. I don't want to do this. Like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
This doesn't sound like fun. I'd rather just end it and
and be done. Yeah. Yep. So obviously a very powerful and strong emotion to have that type of a feeling, to see that as a better alternative. Yeah. You're terrified for sure.
Exactly. And that was quickly shifted by the doctor saying, well, you're not going to have chemo. You're going to take this new targeted medication that has been developed recently that isn't, it was kind of like chemo in a pill in a sense. I mean, even though I didn't lose my hair and, didn't have some of the symptoms, I did have a lot of side effects with like nausea and all of that unpleasant kind of experience that many people have when they go through traditional chemo.
And so you were given this diagnosis, which later we'll learn was not accurate.
Yes.
And so walk us through what happened from there. Like where did your journey go from that point? So now it goes from, okay, we know what it is, supposedly, and now we're going to treat it. So
right.
Walk us through that.
They kind of said, okay, well, we can release you from this hospital. You can go back to your home because you're, in a different city from where you live, and follow up with the doctor who had done the bone marrow biopsy that never gave me any pain medicine, which I was not thrilled about, like him being my doctor.
Seeing that dude again. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, we don't really have a good history and good memories now, like I don't like you at this point because you tortured me basically.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And, then I was told, you need to be on blood thinners because you have a tendency to clot. That was one of the other things that they figured out, which is that part is true, that I do have, clotting tendencies. And so I just kind of went back to trying to adjust to that, like lots of doctor's appointments, trying to adjust to Coumadin and taking this other medication, which actually proved to interact with each other. So like it was really hard to regulate my blood thinning because the other medication would make it bounce around. And it was eventually I actually had to go on a different blood thinner where I had to give myself injections because it was not, that was more stable than
that's the challenge Coumadin. with these drugs, with Coumadin, which happens to be, I think, the most widely prescribed drug in the world. A lot of the dosing for Coumadin there's data out there based off your SNP and allele from a genetic coding perspective, would actually tell you the exact dose that you need. It's called pharmacogenetic testing, but a lot of physicians don't do it.
I've never even heard of that, and I've
it's known knowledge. Yeah, it was part of the whole genoming sequence, the whole, unraveling the genome project. And there's a list of drugs that if you just take like an
Huh,
oral swab, it looks your genetic code and knows that Lyn it's going to need this much Coumadin because,
interesting.
depending on the individual, too much and like you're going to hemorrhage, obviously not
Right,
enough, you're going to clot out. So it's a dial they have to turn. So it's challenging.
right,
So you're on these thinners, you're taking injections, you're taking pills, you're having
right.
what types of side effects were you having?
A lot of nausea with the chemo in a pill, basically, this designer drug. Um, that was kind of the main thing. I mean, fatigue. I started at one point losing a lot of weight, I think partly because of, being nauseous and
Nauseous.
having, like sometimes throwing up my meals, not feeling like eating because it's not very pleasant to eat and then feel so nauseous afterwards. So it was definitely not a lot of fun. The only remedies I was offered were, oh, well, try and take it like this amount from away from food, or, like trying to time it relative to meals. And, nobody offered me any other suggestions of like, how do I navigate this and, not feel like a miserable human being all the time.
So you kind of had to figure it out on your own. And how long were you on these until sort of you realized that this was a misdiagnosis? And how did that discovery sort of
Come
come
about.
about? Yeah.
So I lived with that misdiagnosis for 3 years, and it was really a process of like trying to navigate getting out of that. Pretty soon, like I kind of was like, well, first of all, dealing with this doctor that I really did not like or trust, and having appointments where I spent probably an hour in the waiting room to spend 5 minutes with him. And I still will remember the standard question of like, oh, how are you feeling? And he didn't even really listen, because I'd always say, I don't really feel very well. Like I'm nauseous, I'm tired, like here's how I'm really feeling. I'm not sugarcoating it. And he would say to me, well, you look great, which was a total lie, because people would come up to me and say, don't lose any more weight. Like you look like a skeleton. And I'm like, what is this appropriate to say that to a patient? And two, why do you even ask me how I feel if you're not going to like take the time to receive that information into your brain?
So he sounds like he's one of these clinicians or physicians that just churning through the numbers. He's got 5 minutes for you and he's off to the next, not really truly engaged in the conversation or listening.
Right. And,
Listening.
then
So.
he was always looking at something that wasn't there. So they did this particular blood test for something that was never there. And he's like, oh, it looks like the medication is working. And then I would always be like, but why do I feel so horrible? Like, I don't feel like I'm feeling an improvement in my health. I feel like I'm like spiraling into a worse state.
Are you still taking that medication 3 years later, that chemo pill?
Yeah, I took it for 3 years, and I kept asking my primary doctor for a referral to a different hematologist, because, you can't usually get to see a specialist until your primary doctor refers you elsewhere, which is very frustrating. And I
Mm-hmm.
know, I'm not the only one who's had that problem. And so finally, I mean, I tried a lot of different things. I went back to the place I originally was diagnosed for a reevaluation. And that was a whole other crazy story of like, I get there and, I'm in the outpatient clinic, and they open up the file folder for me, and there's no papers in it. And I'm like, I was in the hospital here for like 10 days. You don't have any like
Nothing.
records? And she's like, oh, well, why are you here? I'm like, you don't know anything about my history.
Wow.
And
You
so it
figure
was,
all those tests, all that data, they just didn't have it.
she didn't have it. And, so we spent this whole time just like trying to explain my history. And, because I was there to kind of try and question, like, why am I not getting better? And I got nothing from that.
Oh my gosh.
So it was only, and this is kind of the part of the story where I started to kind of take control of my health. It was, and to realize that I had lived long enough being miserable, because I kind of continued half-heartedly in the graduate program for a period, partly because I needed the health insurance as well. And so when I finally left that and I said to myself, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to go get a job, any job that has health insurance. I don't really care, whatever it is, as long as I can have health insurance, I'll do it. I got new health insurance. I got a new primary doctor outside of the student health service. And I said to her at that first appointment, please refer me to a different hematologist. I cannot see this doctor anymore. And she said, sure, wrote me a referral elsewhere. Go to see that doctor, and I bring probably a stack of medical records 2 to 3 inches thick, hand it to him because I don't want a chance, him not having all the information. He starts flipping through it. And in that first appointment, he actually questioned the diagnosis. He said, I don't think this is chronic myelogenous leukemia. I think it's something else. And I was like,
what?
Wow.
Yeah. So you've been swallowing this pill now for 3 years, losing weight, feeling nauseous, hopeless. And now just by changing the doctor, something you wanted to do for quite some time, there's potentially a different answer. So then what happens?
So he, of course, had to do some more tests because if he couldn't just say, well, I think, I think he knew what he thought it was, but he didn't want to just go off of that. He wanted to run some tests and make sure he was right, which in that situation, I'm all for that. Let's confirm that we actually get the right diagnosis. And he said, you have something called polycythemia vera, which is a different type of blood disorder. It just basically means I produce too many of all the cell lines. So I make too many red cells, white cells, and platelets. So my blood is naturally thick. And that has actually, I came to learn, been much more correlated with the tendency to clot off the veins in the liver than, like, there's no cases of correlation between chronic myelogenous leukemia and that. And there's tons of cases that correlate that. And so it's like, why did they make that diagnosis? I still will never know if it was like they based it off of one lab test, that there was like a lab error or a switch sample. That's what I suspect happened. But all the data pointed to one direction except for one piece. And they went with that one piece.
It's almost like when you're seeking an answer and maybe they didn't know what that was, right? Maybe their level of schooling or education or whatnot, they didn't know what this other physician knew. So they just were trying to label it with something, and they chose the wrong thing, which in medicine, it happens, right? It's a practice of medicine. That's why we do tests. It's supposed to be evidence-based. And, so that being said, so now you're with a new doc, he gives you a new diagnosis. So what's the protocol from there? Like where, and then how did things start to change and evolve as far as how you were feeling after we started addressing what was now the correct thing after 3 years of the wrong thing?
Right. So went off of the one medication, went on to a different medication. And then also part of the process of treating polycythemia vera is therapeutic phlebotomies. So basically, you go in, they take off like a pint of blood and they just throw it away. So in the old days, that probably would have been what, was done with like leeches, right? You get rid of excess blood in the body. And as soon as those changes started to be made, I could notice like an improvement over the course of a few months. It was like, oh, I'm not exhausted all the time. I'm not on this medication that's making me throw up all the time and feel nauseous and miserable. The medication for polycythemia doesn't seem to have nearly as many side effects. It's actually a much older medication. So it's, been much more researched in terms of, the risk benefit reward kind of ratios. Yeah.
So, and how long ago was all this? Like when did this all happen? Like the start of your journey when you were diagnosed? You said you were 25. 25. Okay.
Yeah. So it was back in 2004. So.
Wow. So now coming out of that, right? So you went through this experience, you were taking a pill that was essentially poisoning you, right?
Right.
That's what chemo is for all intents and purposes. And you're having those effects, you're feeling a certain way, get the correct diagnosis. I mean, how's your mindset? So you told me about the moment when you were diagnosed, right? Which is terror. What was what was the feeling in the moment where the doctor gives you the new diagnosis? Like, how did you feel then?
It was such a mix of emotions, like I felt relieved to finally, like, what I knew inside was like, this doesn't feel right. Like this, something feels off, something feels off, something feels off. And it was like trying to get someone to listen, like, hey, over here, pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
Can anybody like look at this critically and pay attention? So there was relief. And there was also a lot of anger because of course I'd been trying, for the greater part of 3 years to get that.
Be heard.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that's very frustrating. There are amazing doctors out there. I'm not saying that there aren't doctors that don't listen, but there's also a lot of them that it's like, just discount what you're telling them. It's like, oh, who cares that you don't feel well? I got my next patient next door.
Exactly. I have my next patient next door. And also, I mean, I worked in the physician community for 15 years. So I'm calling in on physicians, and you're right. There are some amazing, unbelievable physicians out there. And just like there's amazing, unbelievable accountants, lawyers, but there's jerks
Right.
and egos, no matter what, there's jerk off garbage men. It doesn't matter your career, right. But in medicine, it just sometimes it can come with an incredible overinflated ego,
Yes.
where there's just an inability to listen. And it sounds like, you were faced with one of those individuals that was also, overworked, which is a problem with our healthcare system, but it's also a problem that individual, right? They need to make it the patient the priority, not the profit.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, our system isn't designed that way. So now, being so many years removed from that experience and having gone through it, where is the emotion right now? Like how do you where does it sit with you now that you've kind of had some time to process it all?
It definitely took a lot of healing work to get to the place where, I don't have as many triggers and trauma, basically. I think it was all a traumatic experience. I certainly can get very frustrated when I see other people going through similar things, or I am not hesitant to say, nope, you can't be part of my care team when a doctor treats me like that. I've done it several times when, it's like, oh, that can't possibly be important information, oh, we changed your thyroid dose and you started getting really exhausted after that. Oh, but the thyroid dose is still too high. Well, I'm exhausted and I have to nap every day. That doesn't seem normal,
So you've actually taken that experience and now you're it sounds like a little bit more I don't say verbose, but a little bit more
my own advocate.
Outspoken. Yeah. You let them know, right? You go a little New Yorker on them, so to speak, to let them know like, hey, this is no, I don't want to work with you, or, a little bit more demanding. And I think a lot of us are timid because it's like in those situations to speak up, because what am I to say to the person in the lab coat? I didn't go to medical school. And we find ourselves just listening and bowing down to their wisdom. And I get it. That's why we go there. But I think so many people don't question things and get an opportunity to, like what you were trying to do, is get maybe another opinion just to be sure, because, this person's diagnosis, it's a diagnosis. It doesn't mean it's accurate.
Right. It's not always true, and there's pretty incredible statistics about how often misdiagnosis really occurs. It's disturbing to think of that. And if we don't learn to advocate for ourselves, we can fall into that situation.
We can't. And it's a lot of these physicians are overworked. And they're just trying to get off to the next patient. So they're quick to, I think, so maybe sometimes make a judgment. And again, I'm not saying to those physicians that are listening that that's what everyone does, but a system does create an environment for that, which is unfortunate. So when you find that physician, which it sounds like you found those physicians that actually stop, listen, tend to your needs, and really feel like they're actually engaged with you in the conversation. I can only imagine those who you surround yourself with are of that ilk now.
Yes, exactly. If I get referred to somebody new for something and I'm like, don't like them, nope, not going to go back. Got to send me somewhere else.
That's awesome. And for you, it's probably come down to like a gut feel, right?
Exactly. I mean, you can tell when, you first meet a doctor, if they're really listening, if they really seem like they're paying attention and they care, or if they're just kind of, oh, how do you feel? I feel horrible. Well, you look great. Like, I mean, that was such an example at a big level of like not listening. How could he have
Yeah.
listened to me to say that,
So, so having gone through that experience, that obviously, let's talk a little bit about what you do today and the service and the value you provide to individuals. So, can you talk to me a little bit about how that experience transitioned you into what you do today?
Yeah, definitely. And part of that story is actually even in that time window where I had the misdiagnosis that I started getting really curious about other things that could help me because I kept being told, well, this is all we can do. And I'm like, but I'm miserable. There has to be something else that can help me, even if it's just helping me learn how to manage anxiety and depression. Like I have to have some tools. So I started.
Other than a pill, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So about probably a year and change into the process. I actually had another trauma that happened in that time period. So I very suddenly lost my best friend, who died actually rather, I shouldn't say ironically, but it was wild. She died of a blood clot after having her tonsils removed.
Oh
So
God.
quite
Wow.
shocking because we were the same age, and to see that somebody could just die, I spiraled into pretty deep depression at that point. And that was also, I kind of see it as the low point, but also the point where I started to rise up because while I went to a really dark place and I even thought, maybe I just want to give up, maybe I just want to let myself die. I was able to get some help, some mental health assistance to begin with, and start going to therapy and to realize, yeah, I don't think I really want to die. It's like nobody's given me any tools to handle what's just happened to my life in the past 18 months. It's a lot to process. And so from there, I started exploring other things. I went back to something I had actually experienced when I was a teenager, which was biofeedback therapy, to learn kind of how to regulate my nervous system. So they hook you up to different electrodes that like measure your heart rate and your breathing. And you can actually learn through seeing that on the screen, like how to have some self-regulation going on. So
So it's called biofeedback therapy.
yes, yeah. And
Can
it's
you
actually been,
explain what it is? Yeah, I've
sure.
actually never heard of it. It sounds interesting because it's using yourself and the tools we have in our body, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, and it's been around since the 60s and it's even used sometimes in medical context. So they have different computer programs and sensors and they'll hook the sensors up to your body. So a lot of the ones that I was working with, measured your heart rate,
Mm.
and there was one that goes around kind of your rib cage to measure kind of your breathing. They can measure like your skin temperature as well as like, are your palms sweaty? Because that's one of the things that often happens when we have stress in our bodies is that we'll get a little activity there. And they can even work with like muscle tension as well. And so I had actually experienced that when I was about 12 or 13 with the migraines that I had mentioned. My pediatrician was a pretty cool guy, considering where I lived, especially. And he said, he had migraines and he had found this had helped him. So I went and I experienced that when I was just, a teenager. And then I remembered that and I was like, well, I'm so anxious all the time. Like, what can I do to learn how to feel like I have some control over, how my body's freaking out? So I started going for, weekly sessions of that, as well as going for just, talk therapy. And my talk therapist actually said to me in one of the sessions, she's like, there's a local class at the yoga studio and it's called Yoga for Healing. And I was like, yoga for healing? Isn't yoga like the thing you see at the gym where like people are like trying to stand
For
on their
stretching.
heads
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
or like, like kind of working out? And I'm like, you do know I'm sick, right? Like that I don't have a whole lot of energy. And she's like, no, Lyn, this is different. Like, I can't really explain it to you, but please just trust me. Like, give it a try. Just go for a class. And I was like, okay, like I doubted it, but I went and I saw it was different because it was very, very gentle movement, a lot of just kind of laying on the floor, working with bolsters just to kind of support the body and create, it's a lot more about working with the nervous system really to
Okay.
kind of regulate.
So
And
these are some things that you started doing while you were going through your treatment in that 3-year window, correct?
yes,
Got it.
yes.
Okay.
And I started to feel some better just from that because I felt like I had some control over my body. I wasn't like anxious as much. I had things that I could do when it just felt really hard. And that I kind of liken it once I got to that point too. It was like Pandora's box started to open up to me, and all of these things, as this girl who grew up in Idaho who had never heard of like half of the things that I eventually came to, try and experiment with in alternative medicine. I was like, sure, like, oh, acupuncture, sure, I'll go try some acupuncture.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't think it's going to hurt me. Oh, I learned about energy healing and Riki, and I experienced a session of that was pretty profound. And I became kind of the person that was like, if something sounded interesting and someone explained it to me, I was like, why not? And that just was kind of like going down that path of figuring it
Trying
out.
different things. Yeah.
Exactly.
And is it one of those things where was it because you felt so bad you were wanting to try anything that would make you feel good, or did you start to see these as pathways and opportunities that was it done out of desperation, I guess, is my in that moment, or did you walk into those situations truly feeling it was going to make an impact? Because sometimes I think people look at things like acupuncture and yoga and Reiki as sort of in the clouds, like not like real stuff that works, when it actually it's completely the opposite, right? It just gets
Right.
painted with this picture because it's not white coat medicine based, right?
Right. Who's going to pay for a scientific study of, some of these things?
Exactly. And I don't think people understand all that, the tools that we have within our own body to be able to heal. And I know that's a big part of what you're about. So in that moment, when you're experimenting with this stuff, were you like was it more out of desperation, or was it more like you walked in thinking this is going to work? What was
I
your
think
mindset?
in the beginning, like when I went to biofeedback and started with that again, I think there was a little element of desperation, partly because it was like nobody's helping me. There's got to be something, and I did remember, that it had helped me on some level when I was a kid. So I did have some level of belief in it, and then kind of I think the yoga class was like, I kind of doubted if it was going to work because I had a certain preconception,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
of what it was going to look like and, what it was going to be. And then those two experiences, I think, started to convince me, hey, like this
Feeling
is some
better.
good stuff.
Mhm.
I may not be like where I want to be, but I actually feel some improvement versus, having spent 18 months feeling like I was just declining.
Mm-hmm. So you're starting to see some positivity, some upward movement, and then then from there, because that's part of your journey into doing what you do today yourself for clients,
Mhm.
correct?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's kind of tangled up in when I made that decision to get the job and get health insurance. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was so amazing because when I kind of made that leap, like all of a sudden the path then unfolded because I let go of the thing that I was like clinging on to, like, well, this gives me some certainty. And I was like, no, I'm just gonna like get a job and figure it out. And then I was like, oh, I'm fascinated by this. Like I had a moment in a biofeedback session where I was like, I could sit in that chair and be her and help somebody. And then it just kind of started unfolding because I was like, well, how am I going to do that? Because I have a degree in history that doesn't really seem to like give me much basis to, interface with clients. And I started looking at like, oh, maybe I should study psychology, but I don't want to just do like traditional psychology because I think it leaves out the body a lot of the
Mhm.
time. So I found a program, a 2-year master's that included the body. That's called somatic psychology.
Mhm.
And then it was just like the stepping stones kind of just kept unfolding. It was like I would find something that I really loved. I kept going to that yoga for healing class, and I studied with that teacher. She's like, "Oh, I have a training coming up to like teach you how to teach this." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll do that." It was like inspiration of things that helped me that I became passionate about to help other people with.
So it's incredible how, and I have the pleasure of interviewing so many people who go through that moment where it sort of it flips, right? They go from being the I don't we can I think we in this case we can use the term victim, the person who was misdiagnosed, to now you took that challenge, that pain, and sort of flipped to the other side, where now you're once the student, now you're the teacher, so to speak, right? You're teaching people all the tools based off your own pain and experience. And I always find that transition interesting. It's always very similar for so many people. Like they just it sounds like you set your intention on it, because, and that's why I asked that question before of like, did you feel going into it that it was going to work, right? Because I think so many people, when we walk into these alternative methods or we walk into a potential solution, the placebo effect with medicine and with all different types of things, it's a
Yes.
real thing, right? The mind body connection, you studied it, is
Right.
incredibly powerful. So if we walk into acupuncture, yoga, and these types of things and we think they're not going to work, guess what? They're not going to work, right?
Right.
That's just the
Yep.
reality of it. So, but if you walk in there feeling with an open mind and just take it all in, and you start to see some results, you're going to look for those results versus look for the failures. And then now your intentions were set, right? Now you're like, boom, I see the light. And once you set your intentions, it's just amazing how, like you said, these opportunities that maybe before would still be in front of you that maybe you would have dismissed.
Right.
Now you look at those as like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to be in that chair. I want to be the person that is providing this relief. And that's where you are today. I mean, this
Yes.
is what Lyn does. So talk to us a little bit, because your journey is incredible. I mean, I can't imagine being misdiagnosed. It's like something out of a movie, and then having to spend 3 years popping some pill that was poisoning you is terrifying. And like you said, there's probably many cases of that. So
Right.
um, to now doing what you do and providing a service and a value, talk to me about your clients and what you do for them, what the goal is of your practice and what you do.
Yeah, definitely. So I work a lot with people who have similar stories, maybe not misdiagnosis, but a lot of my clients that I've worked with over the years are dealing with something that has been labeled by the medical profession as chronic. So I tend to find autoimmune people kind of gravitate towards the work that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And usually there's that kind of sense of questioning, like, is this going to have to be permanent and chronic forever? And I believe, we can heal things. Like, just because a doctor says, because there's no magic pill that's going to make it better, which, I mean, I'm not anti-medications. I think medications have their place, but they usually don't resolve the underlying problem. Like they kind of,
Resolve the symptom, right? Maybe not.
right. Or, in some cases they sustain us, like taking a blood thinner, make sure that I don't clot, because
Mm-hmm.
I do have, a genetic predisposition to clotting.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not anti-medication, but a lot of times, that's, they're told, oh, this is chronic, you're just going to have to take this pill and live with it. And I work with people really to unpack, like, the tools that I use now are two energy medicine systems called BodyTalk and Body Intuitive. And those two systems really look at the story behind the symptom, which I always find fascinating, because it's not about the diagnosis. I mean, you can come to me and say, I have this diagnosis. You can come to me and say, I'm just dealing with these different symptoms.
Symptoms.
It doesn't really matter, right? Because the diagnosis is just a label. But it's like, well, why? Like, you don't have these symptoms or this problem for no reason. Like, all of the things that have happened to us in our life contribute to health or to disease. Whether we've gone through trauma in our past, whether we've had to take a whole bunch of antibiotics for various reasons. how much toxins we've been exposed to. Just, I mean, there's so many things, our stress level, all of these things contribute to us either being healthy or kind of moving towards disease.
Mm-hmm.
And when we start to kind of unpack that story, it's fascinating because the body actually, through observing that story, can start to shift the story and like really, it's like almost letting go of the garbage or the baggage, and like, I can heal because I've told you the story now, and I can start to let it go.
So, and what did you call that again? It was body talk. Is that what you said?
Yeah, BodyTalk and Body Intuitive, they're kind of two different closely related systems.
Closely related. So I'm going to try to spin it back to you to make sure I understand it. So with body talk and intuitive, and I don't know if you were mentioning one or the other or both, but it sounds to me like you're right. A lot of people have these symptoms, right, that they're dealing with. Like, and autoimmune is a great example. And I can see why you have a lot of autoimmune clients, because it's kind of like this unknown, whimsical, no one really knows what's causing it, sort of diagnosis. And I know a big one is, things like MS, things like fibromyalgia, just random pain, and people are otherwise healthy. So by people talking about it, by people talking about their symptom, talking about their history that may have maybe led up to where they are today, just by almost like therapy, getting that out of me, that stress, that story I've been telling to myself, this helps people heal because it's somewhat of a release, like talking to a therapist about a traumatic issue or something like that. Is am I?
It's actually a little bit different because it's not
Okay.
like talk therapy. So the process as a practitioner is, it's an intuitive process. So we have these different protocol charts that kind of give us like, oh, does it have to do with the trauma? Oh, does it have to do with something, imbalance in your gut microbiome? So we have kind of like all these different roadmap destinations. And then I'm actually getting quiet and listening to what the body is saying, like what the body's innate wisdom, because sometimes we're like, I don't know why I have these problems. So I can even tell you just in a short story, like how I found this particular tool, which really illustrates like how it can shift something, if that's helpful.
Yeah, please share it. No, absolutely.
So I found this work, I think back in 2012, 2011. It's hard to remember exactly what year it was, but I woke up one day and I had this pain in my left knee, and it was bizarre to me because I was like, I didn't bang into anything, didn't fall down. Like I went through all of the things that I thought, why would I have knee pain?
Mm-hmm.
None of those applied. And I didn't go to the doctor because I'm like, there's no mechanical reason for this. They're just going to tell me, take a pain reliever
and stay off it for a few days. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I knew what the answer I was going to get. And I'm like, I don't really need to take a pain medication for this. I need to try and, resolve it. And so I was going for acupuncture. I was getting, working with my chiropractor in case something was off. I was studying yoga therapy at the time. So I was like doing all these movements for my body. And I spent 3 months with this pain every day. And all of these things that had helped me in the past did not seem to resolve it. Like I would get a little relief, and then it was like I'd kind of spring back to where I was. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? This is so weird. Like I didn't hurt myself. So why does this pain just go on and on? And I would tell people when I describe it, I'm like, I feel like my knee is talking to me, but it's like some foreign language that I'm like, where's the translator for this? And it was kind of that magic moment when I remembered having met somebody a year before who said she did this thing called BodyTalk. And I was like, I don't know. I didn't really understand what it was, but the name of it and her brief explanation made me think, well, maybe she can translate for my knee. And so I said, I'm going to try it. Like, I can't keep going on with this pain. It was becoming pretty like taking up a lot of my time and energy and mental space. So I went for a session, and she intuited in that session. She said, did something traumatic happen to you before this? And I had made no mental connection to this myself. Like this was not something I thought of. But then she said that, and I said, oh yeah, right before this, my parents had come to stay with me. My dad was actually going through this mental health crisis. He was very depressed. He was almost suicidal. And they came to stay with me for a few weeks. We were trying again to seek like a second opinion, which that's a whole other tangent of it didn't really work. Um, but they left, you know, and I was self-employed. I already had this business at this point. And so I just said to myself, well, I just took 2 weeks off. I better like jump back into work mode, right? I gotta like start making some money again.
Yeah.
And my knee was like not having any of that because I had not processed all of the things that had happened in those 2 weeks. And so by her kind of intuiting that and then using a particular technique to kind of clear the emotional baggage from that kind of 2 weeks of trauma, I got off the table and the pain was gone and it didn't come back.
That's wild. That's
It was
wow.
so
That's
wild to
crazy. Yeah, that's
me.
wild. I mean, you're three. It's so crazy. You know, it's wow. It's funny because I know you mentioned you were listening to the hypnotherapist podcast, part of it before you jumped on, and he talked about using hypnosis to get people to a space where they can let things go that
Mhm.
are causing. He's had people walk in with fibromyalgia and through hypnotherapy release where that pain is actually
Hmm.
stemming from, and they're fine. They're totally healed.
That's awesome.
And it's, you know, it's tapping into, and it's funny because I'm going through a journey myself with this systemic inflammation in my body that came out of nowhere a year and a half ago, and we're coming to find out it's microbiome related.
Mhm.
And I'm on the mend, but it was crazy, the inflammation and like just stuff hurting, my knee blowing up, my shoulder not working, and it came out of nowhere. And it's just one of those things where you and your body sends you these signals, right? These signals of stress. For me, it was I was eating the wrong things. And I didn't know because
Mm.
I had no stomach pains. I had no bloating,
Right.
gas, diarrhea, none of that. I felt fine. I could eat gasoline, and apparently it doesn't bother my stomach, but it
Wow.
manifests in the form of inflammation. It's just
Sure.
crazy to me that a stress of a situation can manifest in the form of knee pain. Like
Right.
and people just don't get that mind body connection. A lot of us still don't fully understand it, but it's there. I mean, and that's a profound example of it. And it's just amazing to hear that story. So you had a personal experience with it, and now this is what you do. You study this, and this is a service that you provide.
Right. Because I kept, you know, I was blown away by this. And first,
Yeah.
the curious person in me was like, how does this work? You know, because I'm one of those people that it's like, I want to understand, like, what, you know, what's happening here? How did she know what was going on with my knee? How did the pain just miraculously seem to just poof, gone?
That's
And
amazing. That's
I've
amazing.
seen time and time again, you know, like just people, you know, it's like, oh, I have like the pain in this area, or I have this symptom, and we work on it in, you know, one session, multiple sessions, because some things have layers, and it might not always be you get off the table and it's completely gone in one session. But just, you know, profound shifts when we give our body kind of that space to unpack kind of what's going on for us. You know, why is this happening? What is it asking for? What do we need to see, or what did we never process? Because we have all of us have probably trauma, you know. We all think it has to be some big capital T trauma. And I don't think there's probably many people alive that don't have some sort of traumatic experiences in their life. And yet, what do? We tend to just be like, oh, I don't have time for that. I'm just going to
Stuff it
put
down.
put that over there, stuff it down over here. And, you know, then the body gets tired of kind of us holding it and not processing it. And eventually, I think that's a lot of times, you know, symptoms just seem to pop up out of nowhere. Like my knee pain seemed like it was out of nowhere, but there is usually, you know, a reason. And a lot of times there's kind of a way to make sense of even why it's in that area. So like the knees in Chinese medicine have to do with fear and willpower and control. And all of those things were like super triggered when I look back on those 2 weeks with my dad. I was fearful. You know, I didn't feel like I had a lot of control, you know.
It's
Just
wild. It's so crazy. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's amazing the stuff that is out there that people will often use as maybe the last resort in their healthcare journey, when in reality these should be the things we do first. Therapies that you
exactly.
provide, hypnotherapy, acupuncture, mindfulness. I mean, there's so many stories of people having these miraculous healings versus, and I'm not again dismissing our healthcare system at all, but I mean, it's really not, it's a sick care system. It tends to
Yes.
focus on and profits from people remaining to be sick. And there's something to be said about that, right? And we're
Yes.
these incredible machines that you, all you're doing is just giving it guidance to heal itself,
Exactly.
which is a beautiful thing. And when I look at what you're doing and as you explained your process, what I found pretty interesting is like you've actually gone from you, like with the way in which you'd listen to the patient and you talk with their body and you go through the charts, like you're doing what that one doctor wouldn't do. You're listening,
True.
you're spending time with them, and it's like it's a polar opposite of what you would experience, which is beautiful. So how do people find you? How do people get in contact with you if they want to take advantage of these therapies?
Yeah, the best way is my website, which is heartfirehealingllc.com. And, I'm always happy to I do a free consultation. You can find a spot there to book if you want to have a conversation or you have questions about like more, how does this work? How would it help you with what's going on?
Absolutely. I may be interested myself, to be honest with you. We can talk more
Awesome.
offline. So it sounds amazing. So we talked about a lot today. There's a lot of things that you unpacked. You talked about your journey and the pain that you went through. And from that though, you sort of crossed that threshold to the other side, which is now you're doing exactly what wasn't done for you.
Hmm.
And I love seeing that victorious sort of rise out of somebody. And you've given us a lot of pearls and insight as you kind of went through everything over the last hour. That said, if someone was to walk away from the show with just one nugget of information, right? If they forget everything you said and everything that we discussed, but they remember one thing that they can take with them to live, a healthier and a happier life, something that you've learned from your journey, what would that one thing be?
I think it's to remember our body is always talking to us. Our bodies don't have words. They have the language of sensations and symptoms. It would be more convenient, right? If our bodies could say, oh, you're eating a food like in your story that doesn't really agree with me, please stop. But you were getting symptoms in different ways. So if we start to get curious about that, and rather than, the medical model where it's like take a pill and it'll make the symptoms get suppressed, and that's a whole other thing. I view it as like whack-a-mole because it's going to just come up somewhere else. If we just get curious, and you can even start to just do that for yourself, the work I do is facilitated for that process because sometimes we just don't know. But we all can benefit from that process of just taking time to get quiet and being like, hey, whatever symptom you're dealing with, oh, hey, knee pain, like my story, what is it that you're trying to tell me? And in the beginning, you may sit there and be like, I don't know how to do this. Like, what am I supposed to do? But the more you kind of do it, and the more you just be open to like how that information is going to come to you, because it can come in different ways. Our intuition talks to us differently, right? Depending on what senses are dominant for us. So some people may hear words, some people might see a picture, somebody might just know, like, oh, I think it has to do with this. And the more you just build that like a muscle for yourself and start just being curious rather than being like frustrated by the symptom and like, oh, just go away. This is so annoying. It's like, oh, what's the message here? What is it trying to tell me?
So listen to the symptom, because the symptom's a signal, right? So,
Exactly. And I didn't listen for so long, as
wow.
you heard in my story of like the subtle symptoms, so then my body just was like, finally, like, I'm going to scream at you and you're going to have this scary health crisis.
That's amazing, because you're right. I think the traditional medicinal approach is, I love whack-a-mole. Is yeah, just take, for me in my instance, I would take Advil to get rid of like the knee and hip pain and all the neck pain, and not realizing that NSAIDs completely just rip your gut apart because,
Right.
Advil, so once I, started to listen, like you said, it's really made a difference, not to the level that you're describing. So that's why I'm very fascinated learning more about this, because it makes total sense. I've had the opportunity to talk to enough, naturopaths and healers, hypnotherapists, that have all shared what you're sharing, which is the ability to listen to that signal, and really address it in a different way, in the non-way in which we've been taught.
Right. Yep.
Take the pill.
Yeah. Take the pill and just move on with your day. And then, it comes back, just take the pill again. And,
Yep. And when that pill gives you a symptoms, I got another pill for that symptom.
Yeah,
Right? So it's
exactly.
just like, and so goes the merry-go-round. So Lyn, thank you so much. I feel that we need to have you back on to get a little bit into greater depth about the actual process of what you do with folks, without giving away too much of your craft.
Sure.
But I think it's amazing. And maybe even, have someone maybe go through one of those, if you're comfortable with it at some point, go through a session with you live so people can see what it's about. Because I think a lot of times people are nervous to engage with things because they're like, I don't know what's happening.
Right.
Like going to the chiropractor, but once people see what actually happens with the chiropractor, they go, oh, okay, it doesn't look that bad. I thought they spun your head around,
Yeah.
So I would love that opportunity, and I'm grateful that you've risen from this journey to where you are today. You're helping people out.
Well, thank you so much for letting me share my story. I really appreciate being able to get that message out.
Awesome. If we'll put all of Lyn's information in the show notes, so everyone has the opportunity to connect with her. And thanks again, Lyn. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Adapt You podcast today. Our goal with this show and all of our content is to deliver you the guests and the respective knowledge necessary to help you change something in your life. Everyone who listens to this show has something they want to affect and something they want to change. And our goal is to help give you the knowledge necessary to take you down that path on becoming the absolute best version of yourself. If you like what you heard today, please tune in to all of our shows and also check us out in social media. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, and check out our website and have some great content on there as well. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next show.